maybe start with Naomi. We've just done an edition on outreach. Could you talk about the ideas that were motivating you when you were writing your essay, Naomi, for us first, and then we'll go to Harvey.
Yeah, sure. Would you like me to introduce myself again first as well? Yeah, so I'm Naomi Major. I live in Cardiff and I attend Cardiff and Penarth Quaker meetings alternately with my family. And I work for Quakers in Britain for Quaker Life. So outreach is sort of part of the job that I've been doing for the last couple of years. And I think the ideas for the article actually came from a whole series of different conversations in different settings, a lot of them online like this, in the outreach network, some of them in person, some of them with the people that I line manage. I line manage some of the local development workers, and just hearing kind of from friends about how they're feeling about outreach really over the last couple of years. And it felt like an opportunity, when I was asked if I'd like to write something, an opportunity to try and crystallize some of that and bring those ideas together in one place, which I found surprisingly difficult actually, because they were such different conversations. But it was a really useful process for me to try and condense some of their thinking, because it's been a big part of my work recently. And I think my feelings and my thoughts about outreach have really shifted as I've been doing it. There are a couple of things, attending yearly meeting in 2021 and the minutes on diversity really kind of fed into what I was writing, and that discernment, and also the Swarthmore lecture last year that Helen Minnis gave. And really, I think a big part of the way that my thinking on outreach has changed is how central our concern for diversity and for how we welcome difference and how we respond to difference really within our communities. That's really become very core. It kind of feels like the heart of what outreach is now for me. Whereas I think before I would have said they were both important, but I wouldn't necessarily have seen them as I do now, as really interlinking. One of the other things that I mentioned in the article about the outreach network. So that's just been an absolute joy as a chance to talk to people who are thinking about outreach, struggling with outreach, or flourishing and doing brilliantly. And it's been a chance to kind of grow an online community of people who come together once or twice a month. There are 2 sessions a month. Occasionally people come to both, but generally just to one. And so it's not always the same people, but I kind of feel like it's been a chance to get an insight into the challenges that people are facing. And also I wrote quite a bit about fears, and I think it made me realize how complex like approaching outreach there are some really difficult feelings there sometimes, like the grief at the loss of a children's meeting if it hasn't existed for a long time, the hopelessness maybe of attracting younger people or families, or the fear of being seen as different if you kind of start talking about Quakerism, or that you're somehow holding yourself up as better than everyone else. It really interests me. I think some of those challenges are really deep. They're not things that we can take lightly. And also that for lots of people, kind of being involved in anything that's public facing and outward actually really isn't that easy. And you know, we have a lot of people who come and really value the silence, and they're part of a really deep community, but finding words for that, and certainly talking to people, approaching people, is really hard. So I wanted to kind of try and capture some of the really genuine difficulties that I've seen and heard about from people, the lack of energy, some of the things that make outreach sometimes seem quite impossible. But I also wanted to kind of capture some of the joy and the enthusiasm that I've also come across, and that sense of like what an amazing thing it is to be able to share something that you experience as a great gift. You know, that when we can kind of connect with like what is Quakerism for us, it's something brilliant. It may be difficult sometimes to go, you know, if you're part of a community that goes through its ups and downs, it's not always something perfect by any means. But if we kind of feel like we have something that we value, then it's that sense of having something to share. So there's kind of the good and bad in there. And also with the warm spaces work that I mentioned, I think that really challenged me as to how ready we really are to welcome anybody in, because I kind of felt like setting up warm spaces practically, yes, there are some difficulties, but in principle, if we're ready to welcome anyone on a Sunday to meeting, then setting up a warm space should really just be a matter of practicalities. It shouldn't be a question of like, can we really engage with these people? And I really found that really something I had to work through, actually, to say, yes, we do have these difficulties. We do have communities where, you know, maybe not everyone does feel that they could belong. And also often this question of like outreach, where numbers are declining so rapidly that we really need to get people in, as many as we can, as quickly as we can. So let's go for low-hanging fruit. Let's go for the people that fit right in. Let's go for the people that's easy to talk to. And I think, as I said in the article, how much it feels to me like we have to keep in mind that testimony to equality and what it means to have the insights of different people, that all kinds of difference, you know, that's the richness that we should really be working towards, and that we don't just say, oh, let's have more people like whatever us we have in our head. So yeah, that's a bit of a jumble of things, but I was really, as I say, really inspired by friends and colleagues, and I kind of, it was a real gift to have the time to set the time aside to try and actually put this down in some kind of logical order for the article. So I really enjoyed the whole process of trying to get it into a coherent, hopefully coherent shape. But yeah, it's lovely to be with you this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming along, Naomi, and talking more about it. I mean, I have to say, I'm really struck by what you said about how, you know, someone finding the words and approaching people can feel really difficult. I know, actually, just the other day, I was approached by somebody from another church, just randomly in the street. And I mean, I always think it's a real sign of their faith and their love and what they want to share. But it definitely also feels very alien to me personally. I don't know if I would do that. I'm not sure. Anyway, Harvey, before we run out of time, before we all go into our individual chats, could you talk about what inspired you to write your article, and when you were writing it, what you were thinking about? I think you are on mute, Harvey.
There we are. I shall try hard to communicate better. I just wanted to say, Naomi, I found what you said very moving and impressive. Thank you very much. It really was good. I feel a slight cheat here because the article that I wrote was actually an edited version of an address that I gave to Ireland yearly meeting. I was invited to last year to address Ireland yearly meeting, but I wasn't given a theme. And they just said, oh, talk about whatever you need to talk about. Now that's terrible for a speaker because you're not quite sure what the perimeters are of what you're supposed to be discussing. However, I'm always intrigued in doing something which rises out of my own life journey and the dilemmas of my own life. For many years, as I said before, I was outreach. For 18 years, I was outreach secretary. And what was fascinating to me was not actually necessarily making people into Quakers. In fact, that wasn't what it was about. It was helping people to explore what I would say is the depth of their lives. And I think, and I was supposed to be, as outreach secretary, responsible. I was the responsible person, public person, to go out, and I addressed numerous groups of outreach projects from local meetings and other churches and other groups. And it came to me quite clearly that outreach for me was a way of exploring answering that of God in everyone. And that answering that of God in everyone does not even have to have the Quaker name on it. And that's, to me, is the great paradox, because so many people nowadays assume that the religious life is about providing certainty and answers. And if you can sit with someone and say, well, this is what some of us have found, and this is what the voices and the many different voices within the Quaker world are trying to express, but it isn't the absolute truth, and it may not be right for you. That can be an incredibly attractive paradox. It's almost like saying, you don't have to join us. It's much more attractive than saying, we really think you ought to join us, as a human reaction. And I do see that as part of the act of hospitality. And so what I explored with Irish Quakers was my own life journey as someone who has always felt marginalized, has always felt an exile, but is seeking hospitality, and someone who actually has encountered hospitality. That was the point. And it was the fact that I had encountered hospitality was saying, actually, hospitality abounds amongst Quakers. But not only hospitality, fearfulness as well. And part of my my ministry today, in everyday encounter with human beings, which is how I now describe outreach, is to say, actually, although Quakers don't use the word sin, we're actually, as sinners, as most other groups of people, when it comes down to the way we treat people. And so my question is, are we actually hospitable? Do we feel we've got the answers and other people are empty vessels waiting to receive the higher wisdom from us? Because haven't we been great for 350 years, just at what we've done, etc., etc., etc.? A lot of which is myth. I'm learning quite a lot about early Quakers and the slave trade. I'm learning also about the hostility to the equality of women amongst some early Quaker men. That shocked me as well. So I think addressing the question of what it is to be human, where not just as I noticed in Naomi's article, she talks about how can more people find a home in Quaker communities. I just wanted to cross out the in Quaker communities and write that how can more people find a home. That's it. That's what hospitality is about. And hospitality is also the empowering of other people to be hospitable themselves. And I have learned so much in my encounter with enquirers who became friends, who would not dream of becoming friends, who became friends and were disillusioned, or have become clerks of their meeting in absolute joy and jubilation. All of those people have taught me a vast amount of what it is to explore the spiritual search. And I do see it. I have no compunction in using it, in using the phrase a spiritual search. I'm quite happy to be a spiritual humanist, but to me, it is addressing the soul and having my soul being addressed. And at that level, I think people may well feel attracted to say, who are these Quakers? What are they about? And I think, as Naomi says, it's incredibly difficult for many of us to explore because we have a sort of anti-theological bias, and yet many people seem to want answers in a theological framework. What do Quakers believe is the fatal question. And as we don't do this, and I was to end this. This is a very, very roundabout way of saying why I wrote what I wrote, but I feel quite passionately about it. When I first became outreach secretary, I was fed up of hearing friends say, we don't do this, we don't believe that, we don't have X, Y, and Z. That is irrelevant to human beings today who are not necessarily coming, some are coming from religious groups, but others have no idea of religious literacy at all. You cannot talk, we don't have priests. The question might well be, well, what is a priest? We don't have a liturgy. Well, actually we do, but we don't have a ritual. What's a ritual? So there are so many assumptions that we, the older folk who've been around quite a long time in the religious business, as I call it, we need to have that sort of insight of the human need to be accepted and to find a home. That's why I wrote what I did.
Thank you, Harvey. I think it's very interesting in an issue about Quaker outreach. What you're really talking about is just how do we help everyone find what they need, and it may not be Quakers, and that's totally fair enough. And I suppose, I mean, I'm trying to think, we've got a little bit of time, I think, before we're heading to breakout rooms, or we could head in a bit early. Don't really mind either way. But I guess one question I have for both of you after what you've said, and you know, from what you said as well, Harvey, about we can be quite anti-theological in Quakers, but actually lots of people, especially people who are searching, I think, might have come from a background where that was very much the framework they grew up with, and they're looking for that again, but maybe in a slightly different way. Why is it that you think we are so small as a society, given that we are able to provide welcome and hospitality in so many different ways, hopefully, or we try to? Why are we so small still? Why do you think? And if we maybe keep it to just a 2-3 minute answer for each of you, and then we're heading to breakout.
Naomi, try to go first.
I mean, I think for me, it's probably the things that I've said in the article in terms of fears. I think there's quite a lot of difficulties to us becoming more kind of open and welcoming, which isn't to say that, like, I think lots of friends are individually. One of the really striking things I came across recently was that someone had done a piece of research that one of the main ways that people came to Quakers was because they knew someone who was a Quaker. And I think that personal connection is so common, is such a common way in, because it almost allows you to see that, oh, this is a real thing and it's something that I can trust. And, it's just a really obvious way in, I suppose. But I suppose that if you start with small numbers, then actually, unless you're going to be really evangelical, make a huge effort to get people in, then actually, having to know a Quaker in order to think about coming along to meeting. I think the other thing I didn't mention in the first bit, but I think is kind of relevant to this, is thinking about Emily Provence, an American friend who travels in the ministry, who wrote about the 6 steps of the seeker, and she turns it around and thinks about the journey of the seeker. And I think that, to me, makes sense a little bit of why we are so small, because actually the steps that someone needs to know, from knowing what Quakers are, to finding a local meeting, to feeling able to come, to coming through the door and then feeling welcomed and then becoming part of the community. One of the things about that is it can seem quite daunting, like that's quite a lot of steps. And I think but on the flip side of that, she talks about each of us trying to work out which point in that process we feel most comfortable with or drawn to. And then that's kind of our ministry in terms of outreach. So we're not all trying to do all of it, but maybe some of us are really extrovert and able to speak to people. Others maybe can be really welcoming to a newcomer one-to-one over a cup of tea. And that's a different kind of outreach, but it's equally valid. So I suppose, yeah, that sense of like, it is a big thing to go from being a small society to kind of growing in numbers. But I don't think at all that makes it impossible or not worth the attempt. Harvey, what do you think?
Well, I would put the larger context also is that liberal religion is in decline everywhere. That's a thing. It's not just Quakers. I mean, Quakers are very good at guilt. We feel as though we're not doing it right and we're sorry. But actually, and I wonder, as a social phenomenon, that is something to do with the fact that we live in such an incredibly uncertain world that many people fearfully want certainty. They want someone to tell them how it will be and to give them security. And Quakers don't do that. We don't do that. At least not British Quakers. I have learned recently, I discovered today that British Quakerism are 3% of world Quakers. So when we talk about the word Quaker, we have to be very careful what we mean. And the majority of world Quakers are actually evangelical, or much more mainstream Christian than we are. So we should use the word British Quakers. There is something else actually. I once said to a group of people who asked me why we were declining, and I said, "Have you ever seen yourself? Look at yourself. How is this a closed group or is it an open group? If someone came into this group for the first time, would they actually feel at home, even before anyone has said a word? I mean, there is a sort of person who's happy with the slight eccentricity of Quakerism. I think we have to accept that. There was so much about many aspects of Quakers which other people do share: the social concern, the sitting in silence, even the discernment process, that of God in everyone. But the coming together of all those elements on a Sunday morning with that particular group of people actually demands a terrific amount of courage. And I think we should bear that in mind. To become a seeker, to become from seeker to attender to member, demands a vast amount of courage and self-reliance.
Thank you both. Harvey, it sounds like Ellen in the comments has said, liberal organised religion in decline, liberal spirituality, I'm not so sure, e.g. New Age seems to be on the rise, which I think is a very interesting thing to think about. Maybe that's the way we can think about how we're addressing those people who are seeking. And I think we're just about heading to breakout rooms, which are going to be smaller groups where you can chat a bit more in depth together. But I think we need a sort of starter question from Harvey and Naomi to kind of take us away. Do you have questions at the ready?
Go for it, Harvey.
Well, my question was, given the fact that we're such a wide home, why are we so few in number? But we've asked that question. So I'm going to have another question, which is, what can you learn from your own path to Quakers, which helps you appreciate the journey of other people?
Just putting that in the chat now. And Naomi, do you have a question?
And I'm going to ask the fourth question from the article that I wrote, which is, are we really thinking about the needs of people who haven't found us yet? Which might be, if we think about the people in our communities that we haven't got at the moment, the people that aren't represented, maybe from wider society, and what those needs might be.
Fantastic. So we've got those questions then from Harvey and Naomi. If anyone needs a refresher, I'm sure we can provide them in your chat as well. So I think, Jill, if we're ready to get everyone into our smaller groups, we'll see you in there in a row. Yeah, another 5 seconds. But thank you all. I hope you had interesting discussions in your breakout groups. We've now got some time to either feedback some of the things you might be speaking about, things you wanted to share or reflect on with the wider group, or if you've got any questions for Naomi and Harvey, perhaps from things you've discussed and that have arisen from that, or questions you had anyway, please do share them now. You can either put your hand up or turn your mic off, and or put them in the chat and type them if you'd rather. But yeah, so opening the floor for any feedback from your breakout rooms and any questions. Ali and Stuart, I see a hand up there.
Hi there, it's Stuart here from Wimbledon. We had a jolly good chat in our little breakout room. Thank you very much. Very briefly, I made the point that when newcomers come to our meeting, we need to inspire them. We've got so much literature, so much stuff. Our meeting house doesn't have to be drab. We've got things we can put on the board. We've got books, we've got documents, we've got posters. Just to give one example, and we need to also be sensitive to newcomers, really help them. Don't overwhelm them with so much stuff, but otherwise don't sort of ignore them either. One small little example, we had a newcomer recently, a chap who's has a Japanese wife. And picking up on Harvey's point earlier about friends around, Quakers all around the world, I looked at our lovely map that shows Quakers around the world. It says, there are about 150 Quakers in Japan. He was happening to go to Japan in a week's time. So I said, go to the meeting house in Tokyo. So he did. And he's established a sort of international relationship with Japanese Quakers. So, we've got a big story to tell, and I don't think we should be ashamed of it, and we should be proud of it.
Thank you, Stuart. What a lovely story. Outreach in action there. Alistair, I see your hand up.
Yeah, this is just a quick question for Naomi and Harvey. I did a kind of introduction to friends after once a month after our meeting. We were a large meeting many years ago, and it was noticeable to me that people coming along, first of all, were originally from other Christian churches. Then we had people from other religions coming along. Someone wanted to convert me to Islam and so on. And then we had a lot of people I'd never been to a church before. What has been your experience of the changes of the needs of outreach meetings? Because people come look at, visual aids, etc. Some like the chat, some like the sharing and so on. What's been your experiences of the changes over the years?
Who wants to take that first? Is Harvey?
Yeah, okay. It's very interesting, this question, because I'm interested in how Quakerism is influenced by culture. I mean, not just historically, but actually geographically, because I never forget when I went to did my outreach gatherings in Scotland, I had to be aware of the presence of the Kirk. It gave a different flavour to the Quakerism and to the spiritual church that it did in the south of England, and also, say, in Yorkshire, which is always very different from everywhere else. So it's being aware of the cultural background. Now, someone said something about, more and more people are coming from New Age thinking. I wonder whether New Age thinking is old age now, or it strikes me that a lot of the people coming to Friends are vitally concerned with the future of the planet, of the fragility of things. And my question at the end of the day, in many gatherings, would be, what group, what is it, what book, whatever makes you feel alive and real and creative? Other things are secondary. Quakers have made me feel that way, which is why I've stayed. My partner, who had attended Quaker meetings, who is actually an Anglican but had attended Quaker meetings, feels that that wasn't the case for him. So I understand different needs, and I think that's very important. What is authentic for you? And ask that as a really important question for the person with you. And if you're not authentic with them, then they won't be there.
I think all I'd like to add to that really is not that I've seen change over time necessarily, but change amongst different meetings in terms of the things that they offer. And I think that it's really good when a meeting has something that's authentic to the people in the meeting that they all really enjoy, and they offer that thing, whether it's celebrating their beautiful meeting house in Heritage Open Day, or it's having a poetry or a music thing, or whatever it is that people are into, knitting, anything. But What I realized is that thinking about it with more people was that some people want a specifically spiritual or religious or Quaker angle on an outreach event. They actually are more likely to come if it's a talk about what Quakers, who Quakers are, what they believe, Quaker history. And other people, that's too full on, and they'd rather come to something that's just tea and cake in the garden, or, you know, coming to see a tapestry or something like that. And that felt quite important to me, because it meant that whatever you run, there will be some people who that's just their thing, that's just what they need. And you can't necessarily meet everybody's needs and have this huge array of different outreach events. But it's worth bearing in mind, I think, that like when you're choosing to do something, that it's important that there's some genuine enthusiasm from the meeting, that it's something that's enjoyable, because that's contagious. And also that just to kind of be aware of that thing, that yeah, different newcomers need different ways in, I think. So I don't know if that answers the question asked.
Thank you both. We are getting fairly low on time. Beth, you've got a hand up.
Well, I want to make a comment. Well, two comments really. Well, one is negative and the other is positive, but they're linked. The negative one is that I absolutely despair when I hear us say we must do outreach to make more members because we've got so many jobs to fill. Mm-hmm. We do not do outreach to feed the Quaker machine. Mm-hmm. You know, it puts people off, actually. And I have seen people sort of join and be put in a responsible job too quickly, and after 2 years they disappear. We've worn them out. That's really sad. And the positive side of this is something Harvey taught me years and years ago. He asked me to help with an inquirers weekend, a newcomers weekend at Charney Manor. And at the end of it, we stood on the station platform, did cot, and I was going through the list of people who'd come and say, oh, I think she'll join. I don't think he'll join. And Harvey just said to me quietly, Beth, he said, let them go. Don't know if you remember that, Harvey. But no. The important was the respect. It's the respect for other people's journeys. And that's, you know, it's the other side of getting them in to feed the Quaker machine. We don't do that. We must respect the journey of everybody. And then some of the newcomers, well, some of them come and some of them just don't. We don't hold on to them though, and it isn't important. It's their journey that's important, and being authentic in that, and us being authentic in helping them ask some of the questions that they want to ask.
Thank you, Beth. That's a really, very poignant thing to think about, that sometimes we're not going to get everyone, and it's okay to let people go. I think we've got a question coming through in the comments. Okay, so Ellen has a fairly long question. I'll see if I can summarize it. So this is for both Naomi and Harvey. If someone new, a speaker, comes to the meeting and they say they've read about Quakers online and appreciate the testimony to equality, and it then comes up that the Quaker meetings they are at is not diverse in several ways and does not reflect the local community, essentially they would be asking, do Quakers practice what they preach? And how would you respond to that? I mean, that's one side of the question. She's also added, what is the conversation that needs to happen in wider Quakers to move forward with this challenge to outreach? What is authenticity here? So should we start with maybe sort of, if somebody came along, how would you respond to them and that query they had about, are you practicing what you're preaching?
Naomi?
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic question. Thank you, Ellen. I think if someone comes, I think there has to be some honesty, actually, that at the moment we are largely in some ways a homogenous group. Some urban meetings, maybe much less so than meetings in other areas. I think if you're a big city meeting, it's maybe easier sometimes to be more diverse. So I think we need to be honest that we don't always live up to that ideal of being inclusive, but that is something that Quakers don't just aspire to or pay lip service to, you know, that we kind of have to maybe recognise that that is a shortcoming. I think the second bit that you've said is really the key bit here, that actually there needs to be a conversation at a national level for all area meetings and within BYM to say, you know, when we come together for yearly meeting, we are talking about these things. That makes me feel better. We need to keep talking about these things and actually really challenge ourselves. I think that if we have these ideals, one of the reasons that I kind of came to Quakerism was because of the testimony to equality. That was really core. And someone in the breakout room was saying the same thing, like, you know, Quakers offer potentially this great spiritual equality, but we have to be able to live up to that. So yeah, thank you. Harvey, what do you think?
Well, two things. First of all, when I came to Quaker, I was, after 10 years, I as a teenager, I visited friends. I went to this little meeting in Shoeburyness, and there were 5 elderly women all asleep. That was, I hadn't been to meeting for ages, and that's what I found. And they were so lovely. And what they said is, my dear, you probably find Leon C meeting slightly bored for your requirement. And I thought, well, that was awfully sweet of them. And it didn't help that meeting, but they knew, they recognized what I needed. And they were able to direct me to the right place. And my second point is, we meet so many people who think Quakers are the best thing. Well, I was going to say since sliced bread, but most friends don't buy sliced bread now. But the best thing is it's a good, crusty, brown sourdough loaf. You know, that's what Quakers. And for heaven's sake, we have to learn that we're human. And if you stay with us out of some sort of incredible idealistic thing, you know, we are the great saviors and etc., etc., you're going to be disappointed. The great lesson for me was to realize that Quakers are human beings.
Thank you both. I hope that's answered a few questions for you, Ellen. Jill.
So one thing for me is that statistically, I think we're one of the whitest churches in the UK, and I think we need to be aware of that. And the other thing, over the summer, I went to a talk, and it was about empowering and enabling people. And the strapline was hang up your cape. So it's not about us being heroes and trying to fly in and rescue people with our capes. And we need to hang up our capes and be really the vulnerable, flawed human beings that we are, so that we engage with other people with their humanity too. So those are just my 2 sharings.
Thanks, Jill. Martin, Richard, I'll hand up with you. Just bear in mind, we do only have about 4 minutes left. We might be fairly brief if we can.
Yeah, I'll try to be. I was just thinking about Harvey and Naomi's questions, which I think are 2 sides of the same coin. What could you learn from your own path to Quakers, which helps you appreciate the journey of other people? And I think that's helpful, but also that may bias you to people who come from a similar experience. And are we really thinking about the needs of people who haven't found us yet? That begs the question, when people do make contact with us, do we ask them? We assume that we know each other very well, but do we? Do we really ask each other, what's brought you to Quakers now? What are you looking for? What are you seeking? I'm not sure that we're very good at asking those questions. My first time I stepped across the threshold of a Quaker meeting, I was asked that. And I found that very, very welcoming. What are you here for? Just a simple question. And my answer was, I really don't know. I've got more questions than answers. And he said, you're exactly the kind of person we're looking for, which made for me a very welcoming, questioning approach, a seeking approach. But I wonder whether we still do that, even with the people who are in our meeting. Are we asking them?
Thank you. We do have a hand up from Frank J meeting as well.
Are we? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. It's Robin Arnold from French Air Meeting. One thing, I've just finished transcribing a tape from my childhood when they decided they had a rush of blood to their head and decided that they must have a Quaker meeting on the morning service, which was a problem because they couldn't broadcast silence. But they got over it by bringing up music in between. But one of the recurring themes that I hear and came up again today is people saying, I've been passing your door for 20 years and I've never dared to come in until now. And how can we make it more available and welcoming? I guess actually broadcasting in some way Quaker meetings so that people could experience it or see what it's like before they go in as a possibility. And I wondered what a Radio 4 program technology of that day would look like now in terms of the technology we have available to us. It was introduced by George Gillman, by the way. It was lovely to hear his voice.
Thank you for that. Naomi, did I see a quick little hand up there?
Only just that before the pandemic, I know there was a young Quaker podcast that did do a silent episode, and it was a really incredibly well received. Like lots and lots of media picked up on it. So I think that's such a good point. And that was quite a long time ago now. It's like several years ago. It's definitely the kind of thing I think that both intrigues people and also makes them maybe feel more confident about coming along. So yeah, I think it's a really, really good idea. I didn't know it had been done on the radio so long ago.
I'm afraid we are getting very close to the end here, so I will wrap it up there. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. It's been certainly given me a lot of food for thought, and I hope we can all keep on going out and reflecting on what we can do as ourselves, as a meeting, to kind of keep reaching out, keep kind of being that hand out in case people want to grab it. Thank you so much to Naomi and Harvey for being here tonight. And Jill, I believe you might have a very exciting announcement about what to do after this.
Okay, the exciting announcement is we don't have time to do the evaluation forms. So when Woodbrook send them to you, please, please, please fill them in so we don't get chastised for them not having done them during the session. But I think it was really useful to have the time for conversation rather than paperwork. Fill them in tomorrow, friends, please. Thank you.
I think on that note, please do feel free to head off and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much again for coming.